Yeah, good morning. It's still morning. I'm doing part two and part three today. I did part one before, but I did promise to continue these. And like I said, I'm going to continue these for a while. It's almost daily, kind of, just small thoughts and to go through all of life. I think I left off where it was like, being Greek and American, perspective is reality. That's the basis of this whole situation of everything I'm talking about. And what it's like, hopefully everybody can reflect at some point with themselves of how they grew up. But I was at a teenage point growing up in America, so hopefully my friends can turn around and verify. I was talking about how we grew up in reality without parents taking care of us. They didn't drive us around to soccer games, and then from there, these soccer mom things. We were on our own a lot. We were happy that way. I think who wants to be with their parents all the time. But again, I see a certain amount of pessimistic attitude out there, and I'm just trying to explain to people what it was like growing up in the '70s. Um, let's be honest, as a retrospect, in the '70s, I googled this. I try to be informed, like I said. Um, in fact, you can do this on artificial intelligence. You can do an chat GPT, Google, or ask, can two people working on minimum wage or afford to buy a home in the 1970s in Danbury, Connecticut? You can actually put in Danbury, Connecticut, and it would show you yes. It would show you yes. If you ask, was it possible for an average income plumber or electrician to own his own home and be able to send his children to college? The answer, it's kind of complicated, but it said roughly 70% or 80%, depending on and which college and so on and so on. But basically means that, a large majority was able to send their kids to college and have their wife sitting at home and not working. This is impossible nowadays. If people are thinking life is getting better, it hasn't been. Um, and this is for all the liberals, for all the left people that think they're leftists and things like that. They've done nothing in the last 20, 30 years in the United States. Things have gotten worse. For somehow things have changed so much from my perspective after traveling all this, is that I still remember people in unions in the '70s. Like unions were strong, and people wanted a higher minimum wage, and the 40-hour week had just been established, and all of this stuff was done by left-wing communists, or rebels, we were called them at the time. How could they dare ask for 40-hour work week? This was only in the '20s and in the '30s. Um, what they were asking for, they were called utopianists. Think about this. This is never going to happen, but it's happened, right? And now we're looking at those guys as evil because perspective is everything. Our perspective now that's bad. If you're asking, that you have workers' compensation, how could you be asking for that? Do you think that the free market just allowed that? It just came by itself. That people didn't have strikes, and that they didn't have scabs breaking those strikes and all that. Is that irrelevant? To you? Um, and I want to continue because perspective is reality. Because I've gotten already a couple of answers that kind of um, surprised me. Um, some responses on that I myself am kind of naive, and I'm hoping for things that are never going to happen. That there's never going to be a national healthcare system in America, and stuff like that. And you know what? I don't know about that anymore because again, perspective is reality. My children, I see them, what they see and what I see. If I had told somebody in the 1800s, for 5,000 years or 10,000 years of humanity, we've always had slavery. And if you told somebody you would not have slaves anymore, they would have thought, "Are you an idiot?" Even the great philosophers like, Aristotle and stuff, they thought it was normal to have slaves, I mean, that was their perspective. So, here you are, or women are going to vote. No way are women going to vote. It's impossible. You see what I'm trying to say? It's now we think it's normal, but for my grandfather's times in the 1910s and 20s, women had nothing to say. They well, at least in a Greek home, they did. Just as a sort of growing up Greek in Greek homes, by the way, women are king. The men bring home the cash, um, and the wife will get him a cup of coffee. But that's her home. I'll do another one on that. But yeah, no, and around going back to all this, why I'm saying this perspective is reality. From that was life in the '70s, kind of. Things have changed since then. The minimum wage hasn't gone up, that much compared to the cost of living that's going on out there and stuff like that. For some reason, the normal, middle class, working class was convinced that somehow these guys were the enemies, the labor unions with all their imperfections and mafia and stuff like that. I'm not being naive, all those imperfections. I know them, the corruption going on within the unions, but regardless, that was the movement. More so to your advantage, like I said, workers' compensation and all that kind of stuff. Um, but as a Greek, that never really mattered to us, kind of, because we worked hard. Now, if I look at statistics showing, the Greek perspective now, I did a small video on this. You can see it in the past, what life is like in America. Is, the Greek American community tends to be very successful regardless of all the problems and racism and all that kind of stuff. If you look at the top 20% of the income, or what nations, immigrant nations in the United States over the last 150 years, and you look at their income groups, well, regardless, please don't call me a racist. I know somebody's going to, but you see that the black community, um, certain Latin communities, certain Muslim communities, they have a much lower income than, let's say, the Greek American community. People coming from India, the Indian American community, the Punjabis, the Sikhs. You look at their income level, Hong Kong Chinese, you look at those immigrants, and you see how within a generation, they become doctors and stuff like that. My joke is, you went to America, and the only Indian you saw was at 7-Eleven, right? And please tell me I'm lying, within one generation, you would go to any hospital in the United States, and you waited, and you'd hear Dr. Patel, Ward 3, please, Dr. Patel. There's no hospital in the United States without a Dr. Patel anymore. And you see these among the Vietnamese community. You see these about the Jewish American community. And to explain that, because, let's be honest, if you look at all these communities, you can't say, well, it's because of black and stuff like that. Well, the Indian guy's going through racism. I'm not saying I have a solution. I'm just saying there's definitely differences within the ethnic groups going to the United States and how they react and how they integrate and how successful they are. Um, and my reason, by the way, if you want to see the video, in case you're wondering, I think it's education. The people that place value on education are usually those, and that's why I'm saying this, to connect. I didn't know what it was like bringing back bad grades at the teenage year. I was expected to go to college. You know what I'm trying to say? It's a mentality. So I'm trying to explain what it's like with being like a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old. A lot of my American friends, they just had to finish high school, and then they were kind of like grown up. And I think most of my Greek friends would say, in Greece, you're not grown up until, you get your college degree. That's how I didn't think I would not go to college. You understand what I'm trying to say? I just thought, just like all you guys maybe thought, my regular American friends thought they had to finish high school, and college was an alternative. For me, it was like you had to finish college, and then kind of you have an alternative, kind of. Things are already. So yeah, my brother went to college. I went to college, but I started reading a lot at that age. I went into my phase of reading my favorite books, and it was kind of strange because like I said, my grandmother would tell me all these stories and stuff like that. I started reading about adventurous books, and being Greek, I would go to the library. You had to remember those days. Remember when you went to the library to get a book? Or remember we had to do a school report? book and you forgot to get the book and you thought, oh, I'll just go down to the library, pick up the book, like 2 days before, and somebody had taken the book out. There was no internet to find. You were like, fuck, you got really screwed. I'm serious. Um, to do a report or stuff like that. Life is much easier now. But I started going into Greek history because I really liked, obviously because of my Greek connections and, some of the books at the time that I started really loving to read was, John Steinbeck. As a little kid, it kind of sounds strange, but I really, in Ernest Hemingway, I know that might sound, deep for 14, 15-year-old, but it is the truth. They really influenced of Mice and Men, to be specific, the book John Steinbeck and The Old Man and the Sea, kind of, and I used to read a lot of books about the conquistadors and their travels and stuff like that. So, yeah, I stayed at home. We got the paper, my brother can guarantee this. I thought it was funny, but with like 14, 15, we had been ordering the New York Times growing up in New York City area. And, we got the paper and the Sunday edition, which was the weekend edition, which was, so huge. It took you the entire week to read, but I would actually read all of it. Um, and yeah, like I said, I'm not going to complain about my life in the United States. I understand how people are complaining now, but like I said, from my parents' perspective and for a lot of that generation, they didn't know how to complain, man. Like I said, they saw the United States as a country that fulfilled all their dreams, and from their perspective, they're absolutely right. They were able to send their children to college and stuff like that. But my personal view, what do you call it, voyage at the time is typical of any teenager, with troubles, insecurity, and stuff like that. But I'm gonna open up today, with my neighbor Bob knows we were smoking joints every morning, man. And this is the truth. Bob, you know who you are. I might send you this video so maybe you can write something. You're probably not saying this. I understand you have young kids, so I'm not gonna say exactly who, but every morning before we would go to school. At school, for me was, I can't explain. I never felt like I fit in, to be honest with you. I always felt like this Greek kid. I think a lot of immigrants have that. First generation. We spoke Greek at home. We cooked differently. We talked differently. We different music, and it was like a little oasis of Greece in my house and my neighborhood, and my neighborhood with my family and stuff. But everything outside was America, obviously. So school was, I tended, and I tried to be. What's kind of funny is I thought I had no friends, that I never fit in anywhere. Now I've talked to others, and it was funny because they say, "Oh man, like basically I knew all the jocks, because of the soccer team and the football team. I had good friends there, but I knew all the freaks because I smoked joints and I knew where to get grass and I had the connections, in fact. But anyway, so I knew a bit, but I also knew, the kids that were really straight and studied because I had relatively good grades and stuff like that. So, and I thought I just couldn't fit in with any of those groups, the freaks, the jocks, and all that kind of stuff. And in reality, later I realized that it was just my own insecurity. I fit in all groups. My friends from high school have obviously made me realize they were always like, well, he knows everybody, he fits in. So again, perspective is reality, kind of, But I remember, I was so tight with my cousin. I can't imagine my teenage years. Some of you can remember him, my cousins, if they're watching this. Laki, me and Laki were kolo and vraki, as they say in Greece. Some stupid Greek sayings, but which means that an ass and an underwear, they're always together. They say that in Greek. Kolo and vraki, they're an ass and underwear. Like we were always together. And he worked at his parents had the Headliner Diner. Remember the Headliner? And I would go there almost every evening. My cousin was there. I would help out sometimes on weekends. I'd stop working at the Olympic Flame. I would help out with my uncle at their place, flipping burgers, eggs, 2 eggs over like chibuga, chibuga, chibuga. I grew up, those diner kids. 16-year-olds, my cousins, they know, we could break 2 eggs, eggs over light with one hand, just taking them in one hand, 2 eggs, clack, we were grooming, we were proud, we were kicking butt, man. you can't be a real Greek American unless you got some, scrambled eggs, man. Let me tell you. And yeah, we worked mornings, we worked evenings, we worked weekends, and we always worked. My uncle too. My uncle Vaso used to turn around and says, unfortunately, we make money. He goes when other people are, out basically spending money out. So they worked a lot. My cousins were running the place with 16-year-olds. The entire night shift. It's amazing, really. It's true. My cousin Leo, my cousin Dimitri, and Aki, like my cousin, and I would go down there. He was like 16. I was like, what, 14, 2 years younger. He was like, when he was like 17, 18 in high school. And, he had his girlfriend Jill, but we would go down and, because I had connections from where I worked before. We were, I'm sorry, people, I'm going to be open, and you can judge me as long as you want. But, back then cocaine was expensive, but we were able to get what was called an 8-ball. That's right. We had bucks, man. An 8-ball basically would meant that we gave them $800 and they would give us 10 grams of cocaine. And then we would cut that up, make 12, 13 grams out of it. And we would sell that to get our money back. Yeah, because we didn't have it, obviously. So we were dealing with people who already had it on order. It's terrible. It's just the truth. I've never opened up to anybody I think this way before. I figure I got nothing to lose at this point. Like I said, it's kind of like an autobiography. Did I have bad experiences? Thank God. No, I've been really lucky and blessed. Thank God. It must have been my mother, praying every time. Because, were wild times, graduating high school, going to the party and stuff like that. And then at 17, 18, go to Greece first time again. I left when I was 6. I went back when I was 17. And like I said before, I'm working in diners and, doing cocaine, smoking joints, just graduated high school. I thought it was cool. I was a star. I knew everything. I had a driver's license, driving my Chevy Impala, and I went to Greece and I realized it was another world, another perspective again, um, a world where it was a little city, right on the beach. My family knows what I'm talking about in Caterini, and, they had cafe bars even back then, Thalasso Puglia, the Ocean Birds, it's called, we used to go to a place called the Ocean Birds, Thalasso Puglia and Caterini, and they were young women. I was 17, 18 years old, and, I thought I was, something like the Bahamas, kind of like, I couldn't believe that Greece looked like that because, it's not like the internet now where you can get videos, I just knew it with my grandmothers and I really liked it. I found out there that it was possible for me to register for a Greek university if I had a B plus average and so on and so on. I would get points that, maybe even a B average would be enough to go to a Greek college, And I started thinking about it. And I had this urge to go away. Everyone went, my brother went to UConn, my cousin went to UConn, so going away to college is an American thing when you're going to be 18. By the way, I graduated high school when I was 17. I was schooled early. Why I'm saying this is when I entered the Greek University and I went to sign the paperwork to enter, they wouldn't let me because the paperwork was done on the 10th of June or the 15th of June, and on the 12th of July I became 18. So they said, you got to come back on the 12th of July, which I did. I went to Greek islands and stuff like that. But so when I went back to the United States that year, I knew there was going to be a break for me. My high school friends, remember, they thought I was fucking nuts. They're like, you're going to a Greek university. A lot of even my Greek friends, they had this attitude of Greece is just like this, third world nation and stuff like that. But that wasn't my reality. I had my cousins and friends there. I had met friends, and Caterini family, and like I said, I had no beach bars, cafes, frappedaki, souvlaki, relax, sigara, malaca, take it easy, I didn't know that all. I know work, go to school, go to work, all my cousins, all my family friends know this, go to school, go to work, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Greece, and that's going to be maybe another adventure. Maybe I should stop now at this point because another chapter starts. Um, but what I did learn is when I went to Greece, maybe I should say that the differences between the Greek Americans and the Greeks. Us Greek Americans were much more conservative than the Greek Americans because they had developed. See, my grandparents, my parents had gotten in the '60s, and they had a '60s mentality with them, and they, they didn't progress. But in the '80s, when I went in 1981 in Greece, they had progressed the '80s, obviously, so it was much more modern than they thought. Even though it was different, but I went to Thessaloniki, a big city, and stuff like that. Um, a complete different life, city of 1 million people. As compared to Denver. Yes, I know New York City, but your neighborhood, and living in an inner city like that. It was the first time for me in Greece, and thank God I got into a group that at the time was like really straight, like really straight. Great kids. I had no contacts to drugs. It was that was my personal story. I don't know how I would have developed if I'd continued in the U.S. Thank God I never drank alcohol. I just didn't like the taste of beer. I still don't. People that know me think I'm a Muslim because of that. Because I don't like it. I do drink tsipuro sometimes or a glass of wine, but I'm talking about maybe a bottle a year. Um, yeah, so my perspective then changed there, realizing how Greek Americans, we work a lot more than the Greeks in Greece. The Greeks in Greece were much more with Έχει ο Θεός, καλά είμαστε. Everybody knows this. Δόξα τω Θεώ. Everybody knows this, which means basically God has enough for us. Glory be to God. Today it's a good day. Let's go out. Let's have a cafe. Let's drink. Καλά είμαστε. They didn't have this extreme need for more and more and more that I saw kind of, in the USA, more money, put it on the side and stuff like that. So I'm not against this, but I'm for that, by the way. But I also saw a lot of negatives. In Greece, for example, environmental awareness just did not exist among the Greek people. People would just throw shit on the street, and when you would say anything like that, like, say, hey, don't throw garbage on the street, don't litter. They would say, hey, that is simply Americanaki, like, hey, you're such an American, which I never understood. See, perspective. And I'm like, what's that, an insult? Do you think this is an insult, kind of, like, well, why are you calling me an American, kind of like, as an insult for what? For being clean? Like, imagine, and I see a lot of arguments in people like that are distracting, where you're thinking, is there no logic in you? What kind of perspective is that, But that's his perspective. Completely stupid, but they can't realize that. He thought basically what he's telling you, without even realizing it, what he's telling you is being Greek means being dirty. Because there was no environmental awareness to prevent them. And if you are Amerikanaki, you're somehow stuck under the system and, you can't think freely. And therefore it's insulting. So that changed my perspective too, of how I view the Greeks and how I view everything, and what's negativism and what isn't. I'm gonna stop that now, and then I did do a few things because I got a question from one of my cousins, faraway cousin. But he asked me, Adam, what other books have influenced you lately, kind of like, and I'll be honest, lately I've just been reading like local books, but I will answer you the books that I definitely, in the last 15 years, I went into a binge of reading, various books at various times. Not a lot, but you can get them all online, by the way. But back like when I first started, actually, I went and got it at the library, and it was just, because I did a lot of it in college. I was very affected by this. So that's just kind of answering your question also with my first year in college. Um, uh, I went to the School of Law and Economics in Thessaloniki. It's called NOE, Nomικές και Οικονομικές Επιστήμες, Law and Economical Studies. I was in the political science department. And at one point, we did have under the political science class. I'm going to make this maybe. How long is this now? Oh my God, 25 minutes. All right, maybe this won't be 35 minutes. But, we did a lot on even political philosophy. I remember my first year where we did political philosophy and stuff like that. And things maybe, I'm not saying I was young, so it really affected me. And, it was Seneca. I don't know if people know Seneca, but they're part of the whole Stoic school, basically, of thought really influenced me. Kind of, because, like I said, as a little kid growing up the way I did, I saw perspectives that kind of like matched what I could understand and question what I even thought. And then I actually had to look at it. In fact, the books that, for me, let me put this down. From Επίκητος της εγχειρίδιο, το εγχειρίδιο του Επίκητου. It's amazing for me. Because it's, εγχειρίδιο is basically, how do you translate εγχειρίδιο? Daily book or something like that. But, it's basically, here it is actually, because I put down, some of the greatest ones that affected me. The quality of our thoughts determine the quality of our lives. I remember back then, how that had influenced me, that, positive thinking and all this kind of stuff. So even back then, if I'm always negative and I'm always thinking, think about this, the quality of your thoughts is the quality of your life and your actions. And in many ways, I try to keep this, even in management. I'll get into management later, but much later. And the happiness of your life is based on the quality of your thoughts. And not only that, the quality of your thoughts determines the quality of your life. Again, perspective, what I was trying to say, doxa tau Θεώ, God is great, we got enough. It's that mindset that have always trying to, has influenced me. But most importantly, if you want to do this, just read the Stoic schools, kind of like, and read them yourself, especially the school of cynicism, especially Diogenes, if you have the time. Read them. They're really, really, I think it'll help everybody. My personal view is, from all my life, just something, those three school of thoughts, the Stoic view and cynicism, which I did as political thought back then, and political philosophy, have influenced me forever. I do have to admit that. And I remember, if I don't know if this is written anywhere, but if you can, maybe Google it or whatever you want, but I believe personally, and I think most Stoicistic and most of this philosophical schools, and this will be the end of this part, is that empathy is a weakness. Elon Musk, for some people, is like this wise guru. The guy's, I don't understand how people confuse wealth with wisdom. But, my grandmother had more wisdom than this guy who's, little toe. But he said empathy is a weakness. Now, I can guarantee you this, that regardless if you believe that or not, that the Stoicistic school, Stoiki school, believes that empathy is the basis of modern civilization. Empathy is being able to put yourself in that person's shoes before you make a decision on to condemn him or to support him. Okay? Empathy is the sign of strength. Read them, please. Empathy is not bullying. your opponent. Empathy is to help your opponent when he's down. It's not recognizing. It's not saying, you understand? It doesn't mean that there's no such thing as bad person. It's knowing how to react when you're in power. Empathy is the basis of civilization. Yeah, we're missing empathy nowadays because our perspectives are different through media, through TikTok, through 2 3 minute videos, and we see things with vindictiveness now. Vindictiveness is the new thing. This is the way I see it, my personal perspective, kind of, and I think most of you see it that way. It's blame game, kind of. No more empathy. No more. What's it like being in that person's shoes, kind of. Um, Before you even support him, I'm saying this both, but especially before you even judge him in a negative way by putting him in some kind of a category that fits a narrative of your fear of the unknown. And yeah, that was my philosophical point of view, and that's what it's like growing up Greek. If anybody else has point of view, remember the Greek Orthodox basketball league, Russell? Huh? We grew up tight, man. It was just small communities. Everybody knew each other. Especially the Greek American community. So that's it for what is that, part 3? That's it for part 3, everybody. Bye.